book, The Lines That Make Us. It's getting so much buzz. It just was nominated for the Washington State Book Prize in nonfiction. And he was just named one of Seattle's 35 most influential people by Seattle Magazine. So. He also is a good friend of our Gathering Place. I don't know if everybody here knows about our Gathering Place, our memory loss program. He helped make a movie, the documentary about it. That was, it's been a great tool to get attention and information out about memory loss. So we're so happy to have him. Please give a warm welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And thanks to the Greenwood Senior Center and to you, Ariel, who are the real arbiter of this thing happening at all. She's the one who reached out and made it happen. I'd like to start with a story. It's the point of why we're all here after all. Okay, so it's 2017, it's May, and it is right around 5 p.m., I'd say. Is she French, Italian, Eastern European? I don't know. I can never make out the words when they're speaking, she and her daughter. Here she is today, 40 maybe, with short hair, in a lavender turtleneck and shades perched up above her forehead. She has that refined sensibility you can't fake without overdoing it. The steady poise that lives on the other side of the Atlantic. Her expressive brown eyes smile with pride at her young daughter, a girl of perhaps 8 whom she's picked up, as usual, from gymnastics class. They smile together, separated by decades, but linked by love and blood. Now, a boy running on, followed by his young father. The little force of nature bounding in between other passengers, holding something like a Nintendo DS in hand, but equally excited by all around him. He squeals with delight. Dad's behind him, smiling at me as we laugh at each other and understanding. Kids, it's a good thing. Father and son are dressed alike. You could almost say matching. Fresh, flat-billed baseball hat with cornrows peeking out underneath, black felt street jacket over a black and umber sports jersey, dark jeans and basketball shoes, glossy with the thick white laces. Be black and proud, Malcolm X said. They had the loudness and rhythm and chaotic, colorful verve I call American. With age, we forget how to transcend race. The little boy ran over to the little girl. Continents, ethnicity, histories, and oceans meant nothing to them. They briefly stared at each other like puppies in love, and then you'd guess they'd always been fast friends, the way they're playing now, he a little younger than she. He's squeezing into the seat where she's sitting, showing her the game he's playing, the two of them talking and smiling with their big eyes and baby cheeks. I watched the mom and the dad. He stood in the aisle next to her, and they followed in the lead of their respective children, talking and smiling, laughing in the shared act of parenting, a lifestyle you treasure even when you lament it. Sure, their conviviality required a touch more effort, but it was no less magical to witness. It was happening. They may have been the two least similar people on the bus then, in dress, temperament, and origin, but I know what they were thinking as they watched their children play. We have a lot in common. When it was time for mom and daughter to leave, she thanked the young man for his company, nice to meet you, and he responded with enthusiastic fervor. He reached an arm around her in an awkward hug. The space in the aisle, his other hand holding toddler stuff, the moving bus, it was uncoordinated, inelegant, and absolutely magnificent. It didn't matter, the awkwardness. I could see that he wanted to, needed to, the equal plane, convivial with such a seemingly different person, being spoken to not through the context of race, but from the wider commonality of personhood. In her eyes, he lived as a good man. He was just another responsible parent. The interaction had meant the world, and it was important for him to say so. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about what this book is. It's a little different from other books that are like it. Most short story collections are fiction. This one is not. Most memoirs are very much about the author. This is less about me and, you know, some amazing life story narrative, and more about the people that I observe. The linking through line of all the stories is how I perceive them, but it's not about me, it's more about the people. I'm less interested in writing, you know, some big, like, I was born on a farm in Kansas type of story, and just sharing with you these really beautiful moments that happen on the bus. There are not a lot of positive bus driver blogs. I wonder if this is the only one. I wanted there to be a repository of, it's really easy to find all this great information about terrible things that are happening, and I wanted there to be a repository online of these little tiny beautiful moments that have a lot of value in them. When you, I think we've all had positive interactions with strangers in the grocery store, you know, in the checkout line, or walking out of a ball game or something. There's something that happens in your brain when you have a positive interaction with a stranger that you're not able to have with friends and family, people you know. Your brain feels a sense of connectedness to society at large and the world around you when you have those beautiful little moments with strangers. You cannot have that sensation with your friends or your family, because your friends and family are not society at large and the world around you. They're simply people you know. That has its own value, but there's something unique and special about those wonderful moments with strangers that are very life affirming. What I like about this job is that I have the opportunity to have those types of moments all day, and I feel extremely lucky. My day job is photography and filmmaking. That's all very exciting, but the night job of driving around in circles at night and having weird conversations with people is what's really exciting, and I'm very thankful to get to do it. I've been driving the bus for 12 years and doing the blog for 7 years. The blog was not on my mind when I started the job. I enjoyed the moments out there on the road, but didn't think to write them down. A lot of people, especially young people, seem to put a disproportionate amount of time documenting life rather than living life, and I shy away from that. You know, I don't want to sit in front of the computer all day. I want to be out there. But friends of mine have encouraged me, you know, you've got to write these bus stories down. Everybody has a crazy bus story. You have tons of them. People like them, and there might be value in sharing these little positive moments. The book is not a collection of awful things that have happened on my bus. Hopefully there's some sort of value in giving some of the more positive stuff a moment to shine. This is Tom, who designed the book. His background is in graphic design, published the book, and it's thanks to Tom that this book exists. I don't have time to do everything. It's enough to simply write the stories. I'm too busy driving buses and making movies and writing, and none of this would be in existence if it wasn't for the talented guy on my right. Thank you. In terms of the format, I wanted to chat briefly today about some of this stuff, and maybe read you a couple more stories, and then maybe open things up for questions. Please feel free to interrupt. Interrupting is good today. Just butt in and ask a question even before we get to the questions part of the day. Tom, is there stuff that you would like to say?
You've already said so much. So as Nathan said, my name is Tom Eykemans, and I'm a book designer here in Seattle. Born here, raised out on the peninsula, but been back in Seattle ever since. And I worked at the University of Washington Press for a long time, and kept coming across Nathan's blog. And I think the fact that everybody does have a crazy bus story is what drew me to his, because they were the bus stories that you don't hear about, you don't read about. You might observe them, but you don't find a way to kind of work them into your experience of being a passenger on public transportation. And as I was drawn to the blog, I realized eventually that this would make a wonderful book, a wonderful collection of stories. And after reaching out to several publishers and seeing if it might be a book idea that anyone might want to take on, eventually, I just decided to reach out to Nathan directly and see if he wanted to collaborate on a book. And of course, he was thrilled to, and had his own struggles kind of trying to conceive of this as a book. And it was about a year and a half ago, I think, that I first reached out, and the book came together in no time flat. It has 30 stories and 30 photographs, and it's become this amazing object that's really gathered a lot of attention very quickly, and it's been such an honor to be involved in bringing it to fruition.
I want to highlight, I can talk about the amazing stuff Tom has done without Tom sounding, hubristic. So I'm going to talk about how amazing Tom is in terms of design. The elements that make up a timetable, it's government imagery. It's open source. It's not copyrighted. So this is the exact font. These are the exact components, and I find that exciting. Also, there's a little more of a graphic design element in the book in terms of negative space, excerpts from the stories in large font, and the incorporation of photographs, because I want it to be a little more of an art object than another paperback novel on top of the bookcase. Also, the reason that there's images is because I would like to sort of recast. I'd like to play a small role in recasting how we perceive the homeless and otherwise disadvantaged. There's a test administered by an Ivy League college, I'm forgetting which one, but it has to do with rooting out deep-seated racial bias. And you're presented with a series of images, and you're supposed to hit one of two buttons, a positive sort of feeling when you see the image versus a negative one. And the point of the test is to try to get at what sort of perceptions might you have been raised with that you might not be aware of, even if you mean well, so on and so forth. And what your grade is or your outcome of this test is strongly affected by what you look at before you take the test. If you spend a couple of hours looking at mugshots of criminals before taking this test, the test is going to think that you have an overwhelming negative racial bias. If you spend, the test is specifically about perceptions inside America, the white perception of African American life. And if you spend an hour before the test looking at pictures of Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers and Marian Anderson and George Washington Carver, the test will think that you have an incredibly positive perspective. It's pretty malleable. And what I'm attempting to do with the inclusion of photographs of the world that I'm driving the bus in, some of my friends and passengers, is to normalize positive perspectives. And it's not just that, we're making a book, I wanted to throw a couple of my pictures in there. I hope there's thematic relevance.
Do you have another story you'd like to read?
Tom, I do. So, there's a couple I'd like to share. There's a couple stories I wanted to share with you. And if there's time, I also wanted to read you something that's not in the book and not on the blog either, because you folks took the time to come out here. That's awfully nice. It means a lot to me, especially middle of the day Thursday, and we actually have some pretty good weather out there. Thanks for coming inside. Okay, so it's September, it's in the afternoon, probably right about now actually, and we're crossing the I-90 bridge. They got on in true ragtag fashion, a duo right out of Dickens, dressed in black and cluttered flair, clutching mysterious bags in one hand while reaching to balance the rest of their gear with the other. The outfit of the street person cannot be faked, or at least not very well, because its principal ingredient is time. Time is what makes the details build with each other, stories the journey, etches into space the gradual, layered nature of existence. These two souls were no fakes. I noted her pale and weathered skin, a blotchy beige on her arms, Not unattractive, actually, but rather a record of a lot of life lived. Her amiable rasp of a voice, which told you, here is a woman who's been to all 50 states. She had to be around the half-century mark, and he several years her senior. His complexion, ruddy and textured, spoke similarly, a big-boned lifetime of adventures, high and low. You can sense when couples have been together a long time. A similarity in dress, perhaps, or a consistency in body language. The complementary understanding of years spent filling spaces jointly. A casual two-step deeper than dance. Few things are more gratifying than seeing the passage of significant time together read affably upon spouses or partners. It's impossible to manufacture and quite rare. That's precisely the energy these two were putting out. They were both attired in black jeans, black shirts, black shoes, clean but tattered, tattoos peeking out from her faded blouse, bracelets and rings, a modest wedding ring on the appropriate finger. He with his silver-streaked ponytail, skin that seemed at various times equal parts tanned and burned, a string necklace holding something special. They glowed. They were clearly exhausted, but exhausted together. Whatever their challenges, they faced them not between each other, but as a unit, looking outward. She sorted something out among her belongings, encouraging him to rest, shortly before doing the same, leaning her head against his. I was not driving this time, but riding. Just another passenger seated behind them. Her presence struck me so. I realized I'd seen her before. That fun shock of dyed blonde hair and the kindness. Yes, now I remember. A fleeting moment on a summer night in 2014, wherein she exchanged wisdom about love and loss with words I continue to go back to. That's a reference to an earlier story in the book. Today, now, I didn't need to interrupt them. They catnapped as one, drifting in and out of wakefulness, swaying to the gentle rhythms of the long freeway drive. Finally, he spoke to her softly. You're the best woman in all the wide world, he said, his bass, heavy gravel voice tender, and the best thing that's ever happened to me. She smiled, eyes still closed, nudging her head closer. Thank you. Thank you.
In so many of your stories, what really strikes me is how you capture the way people talk, their mannerisms, and the details of their appearance, and just really subtle actions or movements or interactions. How do you record those so that you can write about it later? How do you think about it and construct the stories?
It's tough. So when something amazing is happening, I'm trying not to step outside of it and memorize it while it's still taking place. I want to be there during the conversation. But the moment whoever it is gets off, I'm praying for a red light so I can have a moment to scribble down some notes and remember, especially the dialogue. The other material you can ponder and reflect on later, but you gotta get down what they said correctly. And if I can't remember accurately what they said, I don't write the story. And that's why the stories are not, none of them are incredibly long. I'm not gonna be able to remember a half-hour conversation. And usually it's only between myself and one other person who's talking. I'm not gonna remember if there's 5 people having this fabulous conversation. It's very important to me to get it down accurately. There's a Mark Twain quote where he says something to the effect of the difference between truth and fiction is that fiction has to be plausible. Truth is so precious, and there's so much we can gain from it. And I try very hard to get it down correctly. And it becomes a sort of a memory muscle that you end up getting comfortable with. It usually starts with me writing down the last things we said and then working my way backwards. In terms of describing how people talk and what they look like, there's a delicacy in how one needs to do that. And there's the question of phoneticizing language. Sometimes when people speak a certain way with an accent, I want that to be perceptible in the writing. It's important. It's how they're choosing to articulate themselves. And however, phoneticizing speech always carries the unintended whiff of parody. It might feel like you're satirizing somebody's way of talking. And That's not the intent here. I'm not trying to make fun of people. It's sort of an unavoidable aspect of trying to document accurately how people talk. We're all familiar with the Watergate tapes. Lyndon Johnson also recorded just about everything that went on in those conference rooms and meeting rooms during his presidency. However, the institute, I think it's in Virginia, who has transcribed all of those tapes, all the Lyndon Johnson tapes, has not preserved the way that LBJ was actually speaking. Johnson was famous for changing how he spoke depending who he was talking to. He would pull out this Texas twang if he thought it was appropriate, or suppress it. And none of that is evident in the LBJ transcripts. They're valuable really only as a historical document, not as a sociological exploration of language, which the Nixon tapes absolutely are. And that's why we have, misspelled words and apostrophes, and missing gerunds all over the place, because it's how people talk. And I'm very fascinated by that. Yeah.
I think kind of building off that answer, a lot of your stories and experiences deal with issues and identities that might not necessarily be your own, like whether they be gender, race, sexuality, age, and especially class, I think. How do you find a way to kind of describe those from your own perspective while being respectful of different ways of living?
The easiest way out seems to be trying to be as truthful as possible and being mindful of my own perspective. I'm reminded, with my film background, I'm reminded of looking at older films. I watched a lot of older films, and there are certain attitudes that have aged poorly and others less so. And what seems to age best is when a society or circumstance is simply depicted as it was during the time. I was just having a conversation with someone about Martin Scorsese's depictions of Italian-American culture from the 70s onwards. And he doesn't hide the racism that's inside that culture or pretend it doesn't exist or overemphasize it. It's simply there. And we are left to make up our own minds of what we think about it in the same way that we would if we were confronted with something like that in real life. And so in writing these stories, I try to document as is, going back to the earlier conversation of me trying to get all the dialogue down accurately and write everything. Are there going to be errors? Of course. I hope that what that causes, though, is a sort of unity of perception that links all the stories, where it's not a narrative arc, but how I see stuff that is connecting the different stories, aside from things like recurring characters and so on. I hope that's kind of answering your question. In terms of the gender thing, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm rambling. I love talking about this because it's so interesting. Someone was asking me, do I have so many good interactions on the bus? Because I'm male, because I have a mixed race background, so everybody thinks, oh, he must be part me, yeah, that is true. I have an unfair advantage in being a male bus driver at nighttime. However, I don't want to take away from my female colleagues who drive the buses on the same routes that I do at the same times and are just as comfortable and more adept than I am at handling any number of absurd situations. And it would be a discredit to their abilities and experience if I was to say the only reason I'm able to have a good time is, fascinating to think about. Yeah.
Another story?
Sure. Okay, those two were kind of positive and optimistic. Let's go in the totally opposite direction here, if you don't mind. When you're driving the bus, you have a lot of time to think. And it's kind of an interesting headspace to be in, because in that recent novel, The Art of Racing in the Rain, there's a line that's sort of astute, where he says that driving forces you to be present. It takes you away from thoughts of the past or the future, especially if you're driving something unusual like race cars or industrial vehicles. And so the types of thought I have are often about being confronted with all of this really challenging life, tragedy, negative experience, and trying to think about how to think about it. When I was in university, I was in art school, and our professor came out at the beginning of class in photo theory, and she said, okay, now I'm going to tell you guys what to tell your parents when they ask why they're paying all this expensive tuition for you guys to go to art school. And she said, it's not to teach you how to use the equipment or learn the history of photography or something, because you could actually do all that on your own. We're trying to teach you how, we're trying to get you to think about how you think, to question what you think, to have an additional meta layer up there that's considering how you perceive things. And that piece of advice has been very helpful with bus driving, even though I'm sure that's not what my professor was intending it to be. So with that in mind, here we are. This is recent, about a year and a half ago. I'd never smelled anything more horrible in my life, and I've driven the 358. I've walked LA's Skid Row. I've strolled down the alleys of the wrong part, more like wrong half, let's be honest here, of Napoli. This took the cake. The Breda bus has a huge driver's side window, and I put every inch of it to use, barely able to keep from vomiting. I'm ashamed to say I described the smell as poop death and relayed the story to others, as I could come up with no more accurate adjective. How do you politely tell someone they smell awful? He was a big man, twice my height and a head taller. In one hand was a full-size plastic chair, which he carried as though it were a paperback book. He might have been 40, dark-skinned American, clad in a large black top with a scarf of sorts wrapped about his neck. He had kind eyes. When you're doing a short route, issues like this are less urgent. They'll be gone in 20 minutes, maybe 10. My route is 90 minutes. Did he intend to stick around? I wasn't prepared to undergo this level of suffering regularly. All the other passengers had scurried to the back of the bus en masse. I felt compelled to speak, but didn't want to embarrass him. I waited till he got off at 12th and Jackson and then jumped out myself, saying, hold up, I want to tell you something real quick. He tarried a moment on the sidewalk, chair swinging in hand. He was tall enough that he formed a silhouette in the sky, dwarfing nearby buildings from my shorter vantage. Listen, I said, I respect you. You're a good dude. But I've got to ask you to take a shower, bro. We can't have you riding the bus smelling like this. If I see you next time and you haven't taken a shower, I'm going to have to pass you up. I don't want to do that. I rambled. I was nervous. I didn't want to embarrass you in there with all those people. He heard me out. All right, he replied. I wished him a good night. A few weeks later, I saw him again at southbound Marion. He was sizable, but bulky mostly in the upper part of his frame, less so his legs, perhaps a former athlete. He moved with relative agility toward my front doors, nodding and looking at me in the eye. I cleaned up, he said. And he had. The smell had lessened. I figured he'd taken a shower and I appreciated the effort. Thanks, man, I answered. This time his scarf was slightly ajar. I noticed something beneath. In the area of the lymph nodes and thyroid were masses of overlapping subcutaneous spherical globules, quite large, swelling to the point that there was no separation between his neck and chest. That was 4 years ago. It's 2017 now, a summer night on an empty 12. I've traded my usual 7 for the evening, pinch hitting to fill an earlier open shift. I haven't driven this thing in years. Here comes Boren Avenue in Madison, in the midst of Hospital Row, and there's somebody at the zone, an enormous figure, appearing even more massive with a lightweight black coat worn over his head as a hood. I see the scarf but can't place it. In shape and state of repair, he reminds me of an ancient Germanic barbarian warrior. Something untethered about this beast of a man on first impression. Feeling apprehensive but willing to take the dive, I take a deep breath and open the doors. Hey, how you doing? It was the kind eyes I recognized first. They have a mellow quality to them, somewhere between frustration and sadness, teetering on the brink of how to deal with hopelessness. He was a Germanic warrior in silhouette only. The agility was gone. I wondered if he remembered me. I certainly did him and instinctively tried to stop breathing. Been a while, I said amiably. Yeah, he replied, coming from the hospital. I hope they're taking care of you in there. What? He said. Oh, just saying I hope they're looking out for you. Not really. I'm sorry to hear it. There's only so much I can do, he said. I have cancer. Gosh, I'm sorry, I said. That's why I smell bad. It's not because I'm just I want you to know, because I remember you told me I gotta clean up, but it's because of this condition that I have. I'm sorry, man. I appreciate you telling me what's going on. Yeah, I wanted to tell you because some drivers aren't cool with it, and I was worried because I remember you said you wouldn't pick me up if I didn't clean up, but there's nothing I can do about this condition. He remembered everything. I felt ashamed. My awareness of cancer has expanded in the intervening years, and I felt the deep, lacerating melancholy of his voice. No, I totally hear you, I said this time. Man, cancer. I've lost good, close people to cancer, and I just... the weight. Perhaps you know the weight. I shook my head, stuck for words at a red light. The thought suddenly burst forth intact. He of all people would get it. The fundament of the dilemma which haunts me so. What's crazy to me is there seems to be no correlation at all between whether or not you're a good person and how long you're alive. Cancer just tears up the best and worst of people. I'm a good person, he said. I can tell. You're a good dude. It's just this thing eating me up. I respect you, man, and I'm so sorry you've got this thing going on. We moved on to other topics. He laughed incredulously at how I liked the 7. What about all those crazy people? And emphatically suggested I pick the 12 instead. We bantered back and forth about which route was better. He got off downtown. We wished each other a good night. Later, I walked through the bus checking for lost items, and the odor lingered, strong, present. But I wouldn't call it putrid now. It had a different shape in my mind, not rancid or foul. It was the smell of immeasurable sorrow. What plans did he once have? How wide was his smile, how rich his joy before it all began? Did he know, in the year which would mark the halfway point in his life, that was midway? And would he have spent it differently? Regret, despair, guilt, woe. These are the names of a present overwhelmed by the past. A past whose possibilities once felt tangible, now forever encased in glass. And what to make of the dispassionate heavens above, confounding in their silence as they look upon all that is glorious and terrible transpiring below. He was a child with a dream once, in America. He likely thought about family, accomplishment, romance, recognition. He wasn't thinking this. He did not daydream about a deformed, outcast body with exterior growths, destroying itself against his will, and revolting everyone within shouting distance. When was he last looked upon with anything besides pity and disgust? I opened the doors at the terminal, but otherwise made no attempt to get rid of the smell. It was as nothing compared to what he was going through. I know something about that pain. Grief is largely the act of being confused on a profound level. We enter this world not knowing how it works, and we gradually figure it out until we further discover we really have no clue. No clue at all. The great universe keeps its cards close, and we go out of this life knowing about as much as we did coming in. Design is difficult to ascertain at ground level, but if we've been able to make others and ourselves a little happier, left a good mark in a heart or two, then some good was done. We made a spark together in the darkness, and it was real. I'm so glad I picked him up. I hope that just for a second there, when we were laughing about bus routes, he appreciated and felt appreciated as a regular human being. Thank you.
Wow. I think it's so interesting how you identify yourself as a filmmaker, photographer versus your day job, and the bus driver as your side job or night job. But it feels like being a bus driver gives you access to this wealth of experience and emotion and almost raw material to create art in a different way. How do you reconcile that with the more traditional kinds of art that you practice?
Wow. Whatever answer I give is going to be inadequate because I'm going off the seat of my pants here. I think it was Stanley Kubrick who said to aspiring filmmakers, if you want to make films, to get a degree in something besides filmmaking so that you actually have something to say. And there's, bus driving is as much an education as anything else. It's quite an experience to be there, confronted with all of this humanity all the time with no context. You just have to trust that you have no clue what's going on in these folks' lives, and put aside judgment and be a friendly face for a half hour. Does it affect my artistic practice? Yes, in ways that I'm not able to fully understand. I tell people that bus driving is helpful because it gets me out of my own head. It gets me out of, self-absorbed art world where you spend days on end in a dark room or something. And it's very constructive to be out here with all these lives. It's much more than an inspiration for art, though. It almost feels pejorative to say that the people on the bus inspire my art. It's more that they influence my concept of life and make me perennially surprised and filled with wonder and sometimes confusion at existence. Yeah. That's the best I can do on short notice.
I think it's probably a good time to open it up to some questions, and then if there's time, we can have another story after that.
And we also have books for sale if you're interested in hearing more of this type of thing. Please.
I'm wondering if your passengers know of your blogging and writing and that thing.
I was just going to say the question is if the passengers know about the blogging and writing.
Some of them do. The route I drive primarily, the 7 and the 49, it's one really long route from South Seattle to North Seattle. The passengers in North Seattle often know about the blog. The passengers in South Seattle almost never do. And there's just a difference in how we use the internet. The passengers I talk to on Rainier Avenue are not sitting back and reading blogs about transit. They're on their way to their second or third job, and they've got more important things to do. So there's sort of a dichotomy of awareness there, but that's not universal. Sometimes somebody will get on down there and be excited about the latest blog post, or more often ask me why I haven't posted today or yesterday, and that I need to get my act together. Yeah, please, don't be shy. Hi, in the back with the hat.
This is your first book, and I was wondering whether you had the writing coach or did you have and my second question is that this is a non-fiction book, so was it possible for you to disguise the description of a character?
Yes, thank
Such
you.
a steady guy.
Yeah, two great questions.
Well, I guess the question is about whether you have assistants writing the book, and also if it's nonfiction, how if any of the characters or people are kind of represented accurately.
Gosh, I love the questions you guys ask. Yes, there's an amazing editor who helped me with the completion of this book, and she brought more to the table than is ever going to be understood. Jacqueline Volin, a friend of both of us. Interestingly, she rode my bus, and Tom knew about my blog. The two of them are friends before each of them knew that they were both referring to the same bus driver. But more importantly, most of these stories come from the latter half of the 7 years past that I've been working on the blog. In my opinion, the first couple years of blog stories, I don't think they're as good. They might be more interesting and revealing my own idiosyncrasies or types of perception that I'm not aware of. And I don't have the self-awareness to perceive. But in writing so many of these stories, you get a little more accustomed to what works and what doesn't work, what's interesting. A lot of the earlier stories are stories of people being nice to me because I found that to be a bit of a surprise when I started this job, and especially when you're driving in working class and low income neighborhoods, if you smile to people, it blows them away. They're not being accustomed to being treated nicely by authority figures, and you can create something really beautiful on the bus, this little kind of small town thing in a big city. With regard to the book being nonfiction and concealing names and so on, I've done a fair amount of research into the legality of that. When someone is in a public space, including a bus or other places like a sidewalk, it is fair game to write about their actions. You are not supposed to, in terms of what strictly defines libel, slandering their character, describing them in a light that makes them sound like horrible people, is bad enough, but the legal definition of libel requires them to prove compensable damages. It's kind of hard to get to that point. And I have taken care to not describe people in what I believe is an unflattering light. I would hope that if the gentleman we were talking about with the cancerous growths, by amazing coincidence, came upon this story, he would not be outraged. Hopefully his reaction would be either positive or neutral. But it is something I think about. Yeah.
Was there another question?
Yeah.
How did you end up riding a bus, driving a bus?
Yeah, great question. I guess I should have started at the beginning there. They've been a fascination ever since I was small. I remember my father getting off the bus, my mom and I had walked out to meet him as he came from work, and looking over at the front wheel of the bus and noticing that it was as tall as I was. And of course, as a child, it's very exciting. But the fascination has continued, but not because the buses are big. It's more the customer service element, I love the egalitarian space of a bus. It's such a democratic space. Everyone's allowed to be in there. And the fact that it doesn't turn into chaos all the time is kind of a miracle. Most bus rides are pretty peaceable, and that's amazing. That folks are able to get along more or less despite enormous differences in such an enclosed space blows me away. And so over the years, I've just been excited about getting out there on the bus. I used to just go ride. And as a child, I was given a library card and a bus pass. And both of them are kind of similar in my mind, sort of doors to opening into new worlds where there's enormous knowledge and experience to be gained. And I think it's especially important for kids to ride buses all the time because you get comfortable being in close proximity to lives that are very different from yours, and that you can always find common ground with somebody, even if they're very different in appearance. Yes, please.
Society's changed a lot since you started, and I believe would have started in a more optimistic time frame in
Yeah.
this country, and now we're in dark times.
Yeah.
And you're the captain of that safe refuge, that vehicle people feel safe on. How are you going to handle it if, would ICE ever get on? I know there's policies. What would you do if ICE attempted to board your bus like they do with Greyhound buses? How's that come up?
My understanding is that that's not something that's allowed on public transit, on metro buses. It's not something discussed at work, nor has it ever happened. If it did happen, I would, yeah. good answer there. In terms of shifts in worlds and perception since 2007, which is when I first started driving, the thing I notice most is how many people have earphones in now, and how many people are very alienated and closed, not as good at communicating with others, and it used to be, I didn't know what I was about to start missing when everyone got on the bus. You said hi to every single person. They didn't have headphones or cell phones yet or smartphones. And they said hi, and people knew how to talk to other people. Now, I would say maybe half of my ridership has earbuds and so on, less so in South Seattle. which is one of the reasons I like driving down there. A little more personable, more sense of community. But I still say hi and thank you to everybody who gets on, even if they do have these big giant headphones on, because sometimes they can hear you. And I want them to know that, there's a greater need for this type of written material now than there was in 2007. I'm curious about what sort of shifts are on the way, and I try to keep in mind this thing of everything changes, everything stays the same. I often feel like I was born, 20 or 30 years too late, because most of the stuff I love, interacting with people, shooting on film, is from an earlier time. But I wonder if everyone kind of feels that way. You get acclimated to what was happening when you were a young adult, and now everything's different, and you're expected to continue adapting, and that takes a lot of energy. Yeah, I'm gonna think further on what you're asking. Yeah, please, Trisha.
Hey, Nathan, haven't seen you in a while.
Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming.
I'll be talking to you later.
Yeah.
How do you balance both in terms of both lives, artist and because
art.
I'm in the same situation
Yeah.
right now, and I'm in a challenging job as a security guard, so I'm learning stuff.
Wow.
It is one of the most amazing, horrible jobs. It breaks right up there, but the people are also informing what I'm writing, and so I guess what I'm asking is how do you not let that overwhelm the other part of your life that you're trying to do?
Wow, the honest
Because I
answer.
go home tired, you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I'm sure you do too.
Yes. My honest answer is I have no idea. The other answer I can give, which is just a supposition, is it might have to do with how I schedule my day. I could easily drive the bus during the day and have my job that pays for everything be during the day, like all sane human beings, it seems like, and then do my art practice in the evenings. The reason I do the opposite is one, because there's no traffic in the evening. It's incredibly easy to drive buses at nighttime. But more importantly, it is exhausting. It is mentally exhausting and physically as well. We don't think of driving as physically taxing, but imagine doing an 8-hour road trip every single day. It's exhausting stuff. And if I work from 4 p.m. to midnight, then I just go home and do my best to fall asleep immediately. And that's doable because I'm tired. If I work 9 to 5, when I get off at 5 p.m., I'm just beat. And there's no way I'm going to do anything constructive in terms of art or even seeing friends. I'm just going to be beat. And so that's why the weird structure where I have the energy in the morning to do talks like this and then go drive buses around in the evening and kind of wind down with the people.
Okay, that helps.
Yeah.
Because I took a schedule like that on
Okay,
purpose
great.
to do some of the same thing.
Yeah.
I also have a lot of downtime, but it's kind of an alert downtime because you're having to make sure you don't
You have to pay
transits
attention.
coming
Yeah.
around.
It's similar on the bus.
Yeah, it's very
I have to remember
similar,
to
yeah.
not run into things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it soon.
Very important. Yeah. I saw another hand. Please. Okay. Yeah.
I ride the 358 because
Yes.
can be quite an experience.
Indeed.
Do you have any special impressions of that route and how it's different?
Yes. Thanks so much for asking that. Those are my favorite types of routes to drive. All of the stories in this book come from either the 358 or the 7 or the 3s and 4s, routes that have that level of intensity. When I'm on the 358 or the E-line as it's now called, it feels like, how the back of a bus has a certain vibe to it. On the E-line, the whole bus is the back of the bus. And you sort of have to sign up for that when you're getting on the bus. And the impressions I have, I enjoy listening to the conversations that take place on there. There are these different sort of self-imposed cultural enclaves along Aurora, different communities that I find really compelling parallels between this community that goes to the methadone rehab facility and my own circle of friends, where you find ourselves, we're talking about ultimately pretty similar things, survival and entertainment and so on. Yeah, I like those types of routes a lot. If you're unfailingly kind to people as the driver, usually you don't have to worry about something happening to you. It's if a fight breaks out, for example, it's only ever going to involve 2 other people, not yourself. And so you can get on the mic and be like, you know, fighting has to happen outside. Not going to tell them to stop fighting, but I'll encourage a better venue. That route in particular is very thought-provoking because every time I cross over the Aurora Bridge, I think about in 1998, the one driver who the bus flew off the bridge and everybody on the bus was either injured or killed, including the operator. And when I drive over that bridge, I think about that. It's unavoidable. And I think, okay, I have to be totally prepared if that happens right now. What's the best way to do that? And that expands into larger thoughts about life philosophy. I need to be happy with how I'm living if that was to happen right now. You know, I need to, people talk about making amends, you know, with whoever your long lost family members as you get older and so on. I want to have already done that already. Not saying that I have, but I'm doing my best. And that gives me a sense of peace where I feel like I'm operating less from a place of fear and more from a place of invitation. Yeah, please.
I appreciate that story about the man that had cancer, because my son, he was an engineer at Spring, Kansas City. He was only 36 years old and he was going through full brain radiation
Oh no.
in Kansas City, and he lost his peripheral vision when they pulled him off steroids. And I was driving him back to Omaha where I lived. We stopped at one of the only 4 ophthalmologists in Kansas City, and she was very, there's not a word to describe it, because he smelled
Uh-huh.
having gone through full brain radiation for
Oh gosh.
6 entire weeks. And it was just a nightmare story that you can't believe that.
Yeah.
It was my own son, he was 36 in engineers in Kansas City. So thank you for putting that story.
Thank you for listening and for being here. I want to believe that these stories have larger ramifications and that they're more than just diversions of friendly or pleasant things that are going on out there. I feel satisfied with this book because it has heft and it builds towards something heavy before finding something cathartic. And, yeah, more than just little positive moments, even though those are nice. Yeah, hi.
You seem to be really positive about all of this. I work with the public also. It's not always easy to be positive. How do you keep that perspective?
This question is one of my favorites because I need a reminder all the time.
It's definitely the hardest thing about the job. Learning how to drive mechanically the bus is by comparison really easy. But every single day I have to sign up for the challenge all over again. And if something bothers me on a scale of 1 to 10, that's just a 1, I have to stop and think to myself, okay, whatever happened is going to happen again. And I need to think about what should I do next time so I'm not bothered by it? What should I say or not say? Usually it's a shift in how I'm thinking about it. And I'm going to decide to perceive it this way or something. If something absolutely awful happens on the bus, which there are a few days out of the year, a couple days out of the year that are spectacularly challenging. The rest are usually okay. On those days, I spend the rest of the trip trying to think about, okay, what am I going to do next time? What does this mean? How can I grow from this? And then I try to forget about it on the next trip. Do I actually do that? No. But I make the attempt. And I want to believe that the positives of customer service outweigh the negatives. But it's so easy to develop the absolute worst perspective on people from jobs like this. And some of my colleagues, there's just the full gamut of opinions on what humanity is among my coworkers and myself. And we're all driving the same bus routes, you know, picking up the same people. And so I feel like so much of this is perception. We see what we're looking for. And sometimes that means, okay, so I'll drive through 3rd and James. and there will be all these people that are in absolutely terrible shape. And I'll listen to some passenger tell me on the bus, ooh, I knew that guy when he was in high school. He used to play basketball together. Now, you know, he can barely move. And I could choose to be absolutely emotionally devastated by that, because that would be totally valid. It is devastating. Or I can think to myself, okay, I do not have the ability to solve all these people's problems. My arms reach this wide, and it's within that sphere only that I can affect change. But in that sphere, I'm going to try to be as positive as I can be, or, you know, something helpful where I can make someone feel better for 5 minutes. And if I can do that, it's totally worth it that I got out of bed and came to work. And the best way for me to be able to make someone feel better for 5 minutes or 30 seconds is if I'm not drowning in emotional devastation. It's this weird thing of, like, it's not quite turning a blind eye. It's something a little different than diving all the way in. It's very delicate. It's weird. I feel sometimes as nutty as the passengers I pick up, you know, but in a positive way. Yeah, let's talk more about that. I'm sure. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, maybe a couple more questions. Hi, yes.
I just recently became aware of you.
Great. Thank you.
So I don't know, the story that you read, is that on your blog?
Yeah, the story I read it's on my website, but it's not in the book. I wanted to have something for you guys that isn't just a repetition. If you decide to go home and read the book, you don't just have to listen to all these stories again.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you talk about your art and you talk about photography and film.
Yes.
I mean, writing this, your blog is art. Are you also working on film?
I am. Yeah.
To cover the same topic or?
The film doesn't pertain to transit or buses per se, but it's about grief and loss and love and all the stuff that people think about but don't talk about enough. And exploring some similar themes, but in a totally different context. Some of the photography and film material is on the website as well. Yeah, and I feel like it's more up to the viewer to decide what the links are. To me, it seems kind of all over the place. The bus stuff, the cinema stuff, you know, the analog photography, but it's all coming from a fascination with human nature and people's emotions. Yeah. Hi.
One thing that I've noticed as a writer on a lot of different buses is the sense of community that can get created.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious to hear how you think, or what you think of your role in creating that community as the driver of the bus.
Yeah, it's so much up to the driver. Sometimes you get on the bus and the driver's in a terrible mood.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Tom.
Well, I think it's getting at the sense of community that kind of inherently kind of grows from the passengers that are on a bus at one time.
It's so much up to the driver to determine that. Sometimes I get on the bus to ride the bus and the driver's in a terrible mood, and it kills the vibe for the entire vehicle. It makes everything worse. It puts people in a worse mood. And I say hi to every single person who gets on the bus, some variation of how are you and how's it going. I thank people as they get off. I still call out my own announcements. Going back to your question about changes, now things are a lot more automated and impersonal. And I had a guy get on my bus, and he was sitting there, and I was calling out my stops as usual, and all the other buses have automated announcements now. And he came up to me and said, gosh, I've just realized the funniest thing. I've been in prison the last 3 years, and I just got out of prison. I've been riding your bus, and I feel better on your bus as compared to all the other buses. And I just realized what it is. It's the fact that there's an actual human voice calling out the bus stops. I feel like I'm part of interactive human experience, and there is a unquantifiable value to that that's major. I was happy to learn recently that PCC, the market, is in the process of getting rid of all of their automated checkout stalls for the same purpose, because talking to people in community is important. So I try to establish something positive. It's harder to do when you're driving the rapid ride bus, because everyone gets on the back doors, you don't have a chance to say hi to them. And saying hi to people is pretty important in terms of establishing safety. Less security stuff happens on my 7 as opposed to other bus drivers as Route 7s. And I wonder if it's because I'm like, gabbing away and saying hi to people, and that sort of defuses people even as they're getting on. Puts them in a better mood. They feel acknowledged. People like being acknowledged. So yeah, mood is important.
I have my own brief story I'm going to contribute about Nathan and community. And this happened last Thanksgiving, on Thanksgiving Day. And it's when we were driving the 40 for a brief time through North Seattle. And this book had just recently come out. And I think I had an extra box of books that I was going to give you. But we were trying to coordinate how am I going to get these books to Nathan. And we had the idea that I live in Ballard and the 40 cruises through Ballard. So we'll have some sort of exchange where I'll go wait at a bus stop with a box of books and figure out what time, what bus Nathan will be driving. So we texted back and forth. And I think it was around 4 or 5 p.m. So I was in the middle of my own Thanksgiving with a group of friends. And I'm texting them, are you sure it's Thanksgiving? It's kind of a funny time to be doing this. And it's raining and it was starting to get dark. And so I went out to the bus stop with a box of books and an umbrella. And I was checking my One Bus Away app to see where you were at on your route. And I could see your bus coming all the way up the hill from a long ways away. And it was dark and raining outside, but the bus was bright. The windows were kind of covered in that condensation that sometimes happens. And it was like a mirage of this big, warm, glowing bus driving up and stopping. And the door opened and came out with like a huge, effusive greeting. And I looked in and there were maybe 15 or 20 people that were all crowded towards the front of the bus, all laughing and joking and having a great time. Almost like a small thing, like a small movable transporting party Thanksgiving. Grabbed the books, hopped back on the bus, and just drove off into the night. And it was just like this moving celebration through the city. It was just incredible.
Thank you, Tom.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for interrupting your Thanksgiving dinner.
It was the highlight of the day.
After you left, the passengers were like, what just happened? What's in that box? Yeah, I had a grad student at UW who was writing an ethnography on the 7 and 49 route because of how diverse Columbia City is. And he came and wrote a few times and wrote a bunch of other people's 7s. And he pointed out to me that how on buses, everyone, this is just universal, you get on the bus and you search for a seat by yourself. If there's a pair of seats available, you always take that one and you don't sit next to other people. And on this bus, on my bus, yeah, he was struck by the fact that all these kids were sitting in the back, all right next to each other, and they didn't know each other, but they were having conversations. And one of them started smoking, and I got on the mic to say, smoking's bad manners, we're not supposed to do that. I love you guys. And they put out the cigarette, and they're like, we love you too. And there was this wonderful sense of appreciation, and hopefully some kind of glow. Yeah. And this is really fun to be out there. And during moments like that, I'm like, okay, I'm so glad I came to work today. This is so much better than anything else. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, go ahead.
What kind of feedback do you get from your bosses at Metro or other drivers about what you do?
Thankfully, they really like it. There was one driver who, I'm just going to share this. There was one driver who really did not like the blog because he used to have his own blog that was very negative. It was a bunch of rants. And Metro, there's a guy at Human Resources who's required to read everything bus drivers write online. So he has to read all this guy's ranting blog posts. And Metro had that driver's blog shut down. It was bad for public image. And that driver does not like my blog. Everyone else does. I get feedback from people in higher administrative positions at Metro who enjoy this sort of like armchair view of what's going down on the ground. They don't have time to come ride the 7 in the middle of the night, but they can get an understanding of, okay, wow, this is kind of delightful. And hopefully gives sort of a positive spin on transit and community.
I mean, I think Metro should be thrilled for exactly that reason, especially Seattle now, after the past 10 or 15 years where it's grown so much and so many new people have come to Seattle and the cityscape is changing so dramatically, like having these kind of nuggets of humanity that are available for anyone to participate in and to read about and learn about and experience themselves, I think is a really important service to the city and to the community, and kind of maintaining the spirit of humanity, I guess.
Thanks, Tom. I want to keep it going as long as I can. Yeah, Trisha, please.
Let me add into that, for that, because I talked to other drivers about this guy. And
Yeah.
so, I'm gonna be honest with you.
Okay.
There are some drivers who have a hard time with you because
Please, yeah.
he's raised the bar. And they're just like, damn it, I gotta be nice now. They're like, damn that dude, why did he do that? But
Yeah.
so you've raised the bar.
Thank you for saying that. When I started,
I won't tell you their names to protect.
please, yeah. When I started driving, other drivers did not take me seriously. They're like, wait till you've driven the bus like this many years, or done this route at this time, you know, or wait till you go full time, you know. But gradually over time, I've done all of those things, and the number of things they can throw at me has gone down until now. It's like, oh, okay, Nathan really is just the crazy friendly driver. And, that's okay. And I'm grateful that they let me, you know, be part of their environment. Everything that I do that's good as a bus driver is something I've stolen from other bus drivers. And we learn from each other. Yeah.
Does Metro use you for training?
Sometimes I give talks to new classes of new bus drivers. That's fallen a bit by the wayside though, because it's on the other side of town and it's inconsistent with my work schedule. I wish I got to do that more. It's those first days at a job are formative, and this job is so different from other jobs. Everyone who's a bus driver used to have a job doing something else, and usually at jobs there's a premium placed on never running late, being specific about money. Here, you're not supposed to get into arguments over fare. You're supposed to let people ride, and you're supposed to be more concerned with safety and customer service than staying on schedule. And that's difficult for a lot of people to do because it's not the same as other jobs. It's a weird mixture, and we have a shift in the hiring policy where they used to hire people who knew how to drive large commercial vehicles. That was the thing. Like, do you know how to drive tanks? Were you in the military? And that would be the reason for hiring. Now, the reason has shifted to customer service. Did you used to work at Target? Do you know something about social work? And then they want you. But it's led to an interesting shift because when I was new, I lamented all of my cranky old-timer colleagues who hated people. And I wished that more drivers cared about customer service. Now, there's all these drivers who care about customer service, but they're not as good at drivers as those like ex-military guys who knew a lot about teamwork and knew about how to work together on 3rd Avenue, for instance. So there's pros and cons to both perspectives. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, please.
I just want to say that I am a bus rider, and you are exceptional, but I've seen many really pretty, I mean, they're driving the bus, they got it full of all kinds of people. It's terribly, it can be a very challenging job, I think. And I'm impressed that I think 9% of them are great.
They're a lovely bunch of folks. I feel
Well,
so lucky to work
Maybe not
alongside them.
every single one.
But, you know, it's funny you mentioned that. I had a passenger who said any group of people, most of them are going to be all right. There's always going to be some bad apples, but, you know, yeah, I like to think that. Yes.
So 10, it could have been 15 years ago, there was a black bus driver that drove in the South End and he had a smile.
Yes, I know exactly who you're talking about.
Is
Yeah.
he still driving?
Yeah, his name is Reggie, and he's got the smile sign. Yeah, he is, He does the South End stuff now, like the 50, or you'll see him on those 100 routes that are just buried way out there, closer to where he lives, I guess.
And has he kept up his,
Yeah, yeah, he has. There's a whole mixture. There's some drivers who like go overboard, in my opinion, with like telling jokes and singing. I don't tell jokes. I don't sing because maybe you don't want to hear that, and but some drivers do, and that's I guess better than being horrible. Yeah, there's the full gamut. Yeah. Any other thoughts? If not, maybe we can move over to, if you guys are interested in picking up a book or chatting one-on-one without all these other people listening. I'd love to talk to you. Thank you so much for being here and for listening.
Thank you so much to the Greenwood Senior Center for hosting us. It's been a real pleasure.